Joining us now, Liz Peek. Liz, noted writer, noted author, noted columnist. Liz, great piece you had yesterday, basically saying this is kind of the fighting back of the swamp monsters. What is happening, Liz Peek, and where do we go from here?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Honestly, I think it's the beginning of the end of the Trump presidency, or the beginning or the end of the beginning. And what I mean by that is Trump really has to turn this around, and he can do it. The question is whether he has the self-discipline to do it. Look, I think, I am totally on board with the Trump agenda.
Yes.
I think it's totally understandable that he has made some missteps. I don't think his backers and his supporters, including you and me, really mind the fact that he operates in a different way. That was expected, but he has got to rein this in, because otherwise he won't be successful, and we want him to be successful. Mm-hmm. What is disturbing, of course, is that there's so many factions, including the media, including the Democrats, including some Republicans, who really don't want him to be successful because he shakes up their very foundations. And, so what advice do we give the president? How can he move forward from here? A, get out of town, which he's doing, thank heavens. I think that'll be helpful. B, stop talking about the Russian inquiry. Stop talking about Comey. Just let that conversation take place away from the White House. They don't need to constantly weigh in on everything that's discovered. There is no discovery, John. I mean, let this thing just kind of fester on its own and sort of die off into the weeds. Talk about the agenda. Let's go back to talking about tax reform. Let's go back to talking about health care. We were on a good track there. And in fact, as you know, that the Senate is still talking about, in fact, the Democrats actually made some suggestions about tax reform yesterday. The committees involved in some of that work have nothing to do with these Russia probes. Let them do their work. Let's get focused back on what produced in the country an almost unprecedented surge in optimism after the election. We have to go back to reinforcing that optimism and letting the people know that their work will go forward. That's what has to happen.
Get back to the agenda. Get back to the policies, the themes that got him elected. Get back to doing what is going to matter. And I agree with you. He's got to do that. And it's amazing, this special counsel. I mean, you go back to, people compare it to Nixon. At the time that they named a counselor there, I mean, people were going to jail, right? There's no evidence of any crime in any manner, any place, anywhere. But yet you're fighting the media, people in your own party, the entire
and the intelligence community, which is the scariest group, actually, because when you say there's no crime, we do know there was one crime, which was the unmasking of Michael Flynn. That is an actual crime. Those conversations were recorded. They should never have been leaked to the press, which is what happened. So, as somebody said very intelligently, what we have is an investigation in search of a crime and a crime in search of an investigation, because nobody's looking into that. And by the way, in terms of why Comey was fired, part of it supposedly was because he hadn't bothered to really investigate, presumably because he knew that the FBI was involved, who it was who basically leaked those conversations and subsequent conversations. So, honestly, there's a lot to get angry about here. And when you have all these factions, as you just started to say, arrayed against the president and the intelligence community as well, I have to say I think the average American is a little unnerved by that, and I know I am.
Well, look, it could backfire on the Democrats. They could really be overplaying their hand with a lot of the nonsense that's going on. No question, though, the intel community lined up against Trump. He criticized them during the campaign incessantly. He's not comfortable with the level of surveillance they've done. He was not in favor of either of the Patriot Acts, which has given, as you know, the intel community enormous power with these FISA courts and faceless judges and blanket warrants. I mean, we actually fought for our independence over the same thing that we're now allowing to happen. So they have a tremendous amount at stake. The other thing, though, Liz Peek, you got to look at, and we were saying this earlier, 96% of the people in Washington, D.C. that voted for Clinton, 96%. That's a higher percentage than Khrushchev got, okay?
Yeah.
if you take the southern Maryland, Washington, D.C. suburbs and the northern Washington, D.C. suburbs, 81% of the people voted for Clinton, and many of them working within the agencies and other parts of the federal government. So you see what you're up against, right? That's just reality.
There's no question. There's no question. And by the way, if you talk to anybody who is in the Trump administration, so admittedly kind of a small group is still, they encounter this at every turn. The so-called deep state, whatever you want to call it, the Obama hangovers, are there in plenty. And it is a serious, serious problem. It always is, I think, in transitioning. But because the Trump people didn't – look, Trump's group was pretty focused on getting elected. I think they were as surprised as anybody else. They did not come with the transition team or the pre-transition team with hundreds of names of people to immediately fire into these various slots. So it's a pretty small group. But what you'll hear from them is literally at every agency I'm aware of, that the predecessor group, first of all, Obama in the last couple of months kind of tweaked the hiring rules at various departments, including State Department, to make it the case that political appointees could stay on in their jobs. It was cheating in a sense. It was not correct, but they're there. They didn't want to leave town, and so now they have permanent jobs, and they are resisting everything the Trump group is doing. So I tell you what, John, it's a pretty massive uphill battle. And, Trump doesn't have that many lieutenants. I mean, it seems that anyway, he doesn't have that many lieutenants that he trusts. But going back to what you just said, in terms of the Democrats overplaying their hand, they also need to be careful what they wish for. If somehow Trump gets discouraged and resigns from office, which I could imagine happening in the next year or two if he just gets pummeled incessantly, he's not having fun. He's not having the kind of good time he had on the campaign trail. At some point, he may just say, you know what, I didn't sign up for this, I'm leaving. Guess what? Then we have Mike Pence as president, and Mike Pence is a very credible, conservative, highly respected guy who could get probably more done than Donald Trump can. So I think the Democrats need to be kind of watching their backs here and saying, what are we really after? Are we really after Mike Pence as president?
Well, look, I think we're a long way from that, and this president is not a quitter. He's never quit anything in his life, and he's certainly not going to give up. And, they're going to stay and fight. I've talked to the family members. I mean, they're very dug in this. And like you said, this is an investigation in search of a crime where you had a crime, and that's in search of an investigation. I mean, that is very well said, Liz. And I think you're spot on in that. But the deep state thing, or whatever you want to call it, you're so right there. These Obama holdovers, they burrowed their way in. They were appointed by Obama. Now they've got permanent civil service jobs. And I know right now for a fact, I've got 3 Trump loyalists, 3 of them, that were with the campaign from the beginning. 2 of them have jobs in agencies. Sam Clovis in the Department of Agriculture and Curtis Ellis, who's in the Department of Labor. I mean, these people have been with us from the beginning. They got jobs in that 120-day extension. There's a third person, doesn't want me to mention his name, okay, in the State Department. Yep. And so those in the personnel office and in these various agencies have been going to the media, leaking negative stories on them, trying to get them out. Now, this is only 3 people that I'm aware of. So the purge, what is happening, is beyond what anybody really thinks. It's like those loyal to Trump that he tried to put in these various agencies are now their detractors, the deep staters. They leak stuff on them. They investigate their background. They leak stuff to the press, and they try and get them out.
Yeah,
this is unbelievable. And this just came to my attention this week. I talked to all 3 of them. All 3 of them now, they have jobs. And the way it works is you get the transition landing team, Liz, and then you have a temporary appointment for 120 days. Right. And then when the 120 days is up, if you're not permanent, you get appointment for a second 120 days. So these people are doing these jobs, and they have detractors in these agencies trying to get them fired. And the only reason is because they were original Trump loyalists, and they're trying to get them out. And they do this by going to the media, who then is complicit with doing a hit piece on them. It's unbelievable.
It is. It's really, I think, honestly, it borders on unpatriotic. I mean, there's partisan politics, but we should all want our government to be functioning. And the way these people are operating right now, it is barely functioning. And that is really abhorrent. I mean, and no one calls them out on this, which is also offensive. But again, I think there's an interesting question, John. Thank heavens there are people like you out there who are talking about these things, because otherwise Americans would have no idea what's going on. They wouldn't understand when you see these articles in the press about how few appointments have been made by the Trump administration. You need to tell people that's because the Democrats are making it almost impossible to get anyone through this thicket of antagonism and leaks and maligning of character and all the rest of the stuff that's going on. It is really, really damaging. And, at the end of the day, who's it hurting? It's hurting our country.
Here's the question. This is all being exposed now, Liz Peek. What's next? Is it going to be people in the media that back Trump? Is it going to be, what's next? This is an all-out war. I mean, you look at the piece in the Washington Post on Monday night. This is really what got me started, where they basically had 3 people in this meeting with the Russian diplomats, 3 senior officials, one of them a Silver Star General McMaster, was never a Trump guy from the beginning. This guy's a neocon, George Bush, right? They got Dana Powell, who was also a never Trumper, okay? And then Rex Tillerson. They all just absolutely say to the Washington Post, no, that story is false, it's a lie. And instead they go with a headline with 3 third-party sources.
Right?
Third party that were not even there. Incredible.
It is really incredible. And there's no self-policing by what used to be credible media outlets like the Washington Post and the New York Times. The best thing that ever happened to all these organizations is Donald Trump, because he has personally resuscitated a failing New York Times. It is true. I mean, their subscriptions are up because the venom is so satisfying to people on the left that they're just eating it up. Look, the answer is the only thing that can get Trump out of this is to have some legislative victories. He needs to, as I say, kind of pull together his team, pull together the people who could actually be helpful to him, talk to Congress, steady the nerves, get out of town for a couple of days, stop talking about how everybody's beating up on him, and instead go back to talking about what he wants to accomplish for the country. Rebuild the optimism, because really that is the hard data on how impactful this guy has been and can be. We need to go back to that.
I think you're right. We need to go back to that and get out of this nonsense. And let me just end, Liz Peek, on one other thing that really bothered me this week, which I've never seen anything like this. And I'll do a disclaimer. I'm a friend of Sean Spicer's. I know him a very long time, and I'm a friend of his. So let's just put that aside. But the fact that Kimberly Guilfoyle of Fox News is going to the media openly campaigning to get him fired and get his job is one of the most sickening, disgusting things I've ever seen in my life. Regardless of my friendship with Sean Spicer, I mean, you go in the media and you campaign to get somebody fired who's doing the best job. I mean, he's doing a good job. I mean, what is going? Have you ever seen this? And and they entertain
it. I don't know. I really haven't followed that closely. I know that there's a lot of chatter about who might replace Sean Spicer. I think he has an impossible job, and I think he's actually held up pretty well under the relentless pressure. And Kimberly Guilfoyle is a very smart woman. It's conceivable that she could do a good job in this, but you know what? Until you're in those shoes, people should have some respect for the challenges that Spicer and others in the communication team have. But, I agree with you. I think it's kind of appalling.
I mean, appalling to go on the media. It's one thing if you're doing a back channel. Look, I get it. You know what? I'm 59. I'm a big boy. I'm over 21. I get it. You want that job. But going to the media and saying, hey, I would be a better choice, and the guy's still in the job, I've never seen anything like this in my life. It's crazy time we're in. And Liz Peek, always great to have you on. Great column, by the way. Now, you can read Liz Peek. You can go to the Fiscal Times. You go to foxnews.com, or here's the way I get it. The best website to get her is lizpeak.com. lizpeak.com. And then you follow her on Twitter at lizpeak, and then it gets in your Twitter feed. She sends something out, bang, it's there. Easy reading. Thanks for being with us, Liz.
My pleasure. Take care.